You're listening to Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care Vigor, a podcast where we explore what it's like getting older, the peaks, the valleys, and everything in between. In this season of Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care Vigor, we're covering topics related to vibrant aging. I'm your host, Cheryl Proska. Let's grow old together. On today's episode, I'm joined by Linda Hirschman, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist and the founder of Couples and Family Wellness Center. Linda's specialties include discernment counseling, supervising the next generation of counselors, gray divorce, and speaking and writing engagements. Linda also authored the book, Gray Divorce: Everything You Need to Know About Later Life Breakups. Linda, welcome, and thank you for being here. How are you today?
I'm doing great today, Cheryl. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Oh, absolutely. So, Linda, you're joining me today to discuss gray divorce, discernment counseling, and what to consider before, during, and after a later life breakup. To start, can you share a bit about your background and your interest in gray divorce?
Sure. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I have been practicing for 30 years now. I choke a little bit when I say that. Hard to believe, but here we are. And I started becoming interested in gray divorce when I was writing an article on a different topic. And, when you go down the rabbit hole of internet research, you find these terms and subjects, and the term gray divorce came up, and I got interested in it. As I started reading more about it, it occurred to me how many of my clients who were either divorcing or divorce questioning were over age 50. And at the time I first heard the term, I was well into my 50s and had been practicing as an LMFT for a very long time. And I realized, wait a minute, if I didn't know about this, probably there are lots of people who didn't know about it, and made it my mission to find out everything I could.
So you mentioned gray divorce. I mentioned the term as well. Can you go ahead and define gray divorce for our listeners?
Absolutely. And let me just start by saying this is not my term. I don't own it. I did not come up with it. It was coined by two sociologists who wrote the seminal book called Gray Divorce, which is about 700 pages of statistical studies. And the technical definition of gray divorce is divorce over age 50.
Okay. So, gray divorce, divorce over age 50. In your experience as a licensed marriage and family therapist for so many years, who are you seeing seeking a gray divorce and why?
So, this is the statistics part of the program, but
I'm ready for it.
okay, but I will keep it very brief. First of all, let me just say when I started researching my book, 25% of married couples over age 50 were divorcing. That was up from 1990 when 10% were divorcing. So between 1990 and 2019, it had gone from 10% to 25%. The most recent statistics are 33%
Wow.
of couples over age 50 are divorcing. And in terms of who is seeking gray divorce, fun fact, 66% of gray divorces are initiated by women.
So that leads me to wonder what would you say are the similarities and the differences between men and women who are seeking gray divorce?
Well, When you talk to men and women who are seeking or are having gray divorce thrust on them, the
Mm.
each has two major fears, and one of them is the same. Both men and women worry about finances. Am I going to be okay? And women worry, their other major fear is, who is going to take care of me? Am I going to end up alone?
Mm.
And for men, their other major fear is, how is this going to impact my relationship with my adult children?
Mhm.
Which is a legitimate fear because men men's relationship with their children is more impacted after a gray divorce than are women's.
So you mentioned you brought children into the conversation, and I'm obviously an adult child myself. So let's speak to those parents who are listening. And how might a later life divorce affect adult children that are part of the equation?
Yeah, part of the problem is there is this thinking that when the parents of adult children divorce, that they're not impacted,
Mm.
and it becomes what is called an ambiguous loss, which again is not a term that I developed. It was written about first by a psychologist named Dr. Pauline Boss. Ambiguous losses refer to losses that are generally not recognized by society as losses, for which there are no mourning rituals, no kinds of grieving rituals, and there typically is no closure on it. And what happens when older parents divorce, the assumption, both by the parents and by society, and even by the children, and there's an acronym by that for that, by the way, it's ACODs, Adult Children of Divorce.
Mm.
So what happens for ACODs is, it is assumed you're adults, you can understand things differently, you have your own life, this is not going to impact you. But in reality, in some ways, gray divorce impacts ACODs even more than it does younger children, because they're left to twist in the wind with no help, no support. Let's face it, nobody is sitting down with their 27-year-old and reading a book about mommy and daddy are getting divorced. And so, what often happens, I'm sorry, backing up a little bit,
Mhm.
it can also impact ACODs in financial ways and other real ways. Things that they had been promised suddenly are not going to be there. Like, we can't pay for your wedding because suddenly we're splitting our assets, or we can't continue paying for your education, or I know I was watching my grandchildren 3 days a week, but guess what? I have to go back to work now, or I'm moving to a different area and it's not convenient anymore. And
Mm.
so those are some of the tangible impacts. But in terms of the emotional impacts, like I said, it's not talked about. And when your feelings are not validated, you start to question yourself. When ACODs go to therapy, they almost never go to discuss their parents' divorce. They go for other relationship issues, like trust issues, like wondering if their lives are real. And
Mm.
so part of the mission that I've been on is to educate both the parents and the adult children that this is a real loss.
It's absolutely a real loss. And one other factor that popped into my mind was as an adult, if I had to watch my parents and experience my parents going through a divorce, and then if they find another person to them dating in so many terms or eventually marrying another person, I'd have trouble. I'd have a lot of trouble as an adult with that. So just speaking for myself, I can absolutely put myself in the shoes of the ACODs.
And let's expand on that even more, Cheryl. Think about the holidays, how difficult it is when your when you come from a family where your parents have stayed together and they're married, and you have a partner and their parents have stayed together and are married, and all the juggling that you have to do to figure out where we're going to spend the holidays. Now, let's look at that in terms of okay, your parents have gotten divorced. Each of your parents has repartnered. And by the way, your partner's parents are divorced, and each of them has a new partner. So you've got all this juggling to do. And but getting back to the emotional impacts, there are
Mhm.
also very real loyalty issues that come up. And one of the mistakes that parents make, assuming they're adult children, looking at them as adults and forgetting they're still our children. And there's a tendency to confide in them, to
Mhm.
tell them things that I don't care how old you are, you just don't really need to know about your parents.
Would you prefer to age independently in your own home or live in a nursing facility? I know what I'd rather do. Friends Life Care membership offers just that. Plan today for a future lived at home with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience while protecting your savings. Learn about your options at a free seminar or webinar. Register at friendslifecare.org/register or call 215-628-8964. So you started we're talking about in so many words like how a later life divorce is different than an earlier life divorce, and one is the ACODs. I'm curious what else might be different about later life divorce compared to an earlier in life divorce.
Well, let's look at the finances. When you are divorced at age 30 or 40, you still are looking in terms of, I've got another 30 years to rebuild my wealth after divorce. When you're divorcing at 70, you're not looking at rebuilding wealth.
Mhm.
That's one factor that plays into it. And usually, not for everybody, obviously, but when you're 30 or 35 or 40 years old, you're not looking at who's going to take care of me. You're not looking at what if I get sick. So these are factors. And then, of course, like who's going to be interested in me as a 60 or 70 or 75-year-old?
Mhm. So we're talking about there's financial considerations, there's a caregiving consideration, emotional consideration. Are there other considerations that we should explore when navigating a later life breakup?
Well, I think before any breakup, but maybe even particularly in later life, you want to be taking a really good hard look at why am I doing this? And is this something that I've been feeling for a long time? Or am I in this place right now where suddenly it seems like the thing to do?
I think that's a lovely segue into bringing up the topic of discernment counseling, which
Mm.
is one of your specialties. And it's something that I learned about for the first time in preparing for this podcast and having the opportunity to meet you. And I'd love it if you could share more about discernment counseling. What is it? And could you maybe also give some situations where you'd say it would be a good fit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad we're talking about this because for me, discernment counseling is this great widget that only a few of us have, and nobody knows we have it. Discernment counseling, and again, not something I developed. It was developed by a very prominent therapist named Dr. Bill Doherty. And discernment counseling is a brief protocol that is geared for couples where typically one person is leaning out toward divorce and the other is leaning in and wants to save the marriage. And it is specifically geared toward couples when you're having trouble making a decision of whether we get divorced or we go for marriage counseling. Because what happens when people come into marriage counseling and they don't even know if they want to be married anymore, there's no motivation for that leaning out partner to change.
Yeah.
And without that motivation and interest, what generally happens is they go to a few sessions, they say, see, marriage counseling didn't work, and go on their way there. And so, like I said, discernment counseling is a brief protocol. It is typically 1 to 5 sessions, and it is geared toward making a decision. There are 3 paths. Path one is don't make a decision right now and revisit it at a later time. And quite frankly, Cheryl, everybody who has ever called me for discernment counseling starts out by saying, well, that's what I've been doing. I don't want to do that anymore. But they've been doing it generally in a very passive way, like, I just can't make a decision, so I won't. Whereas in the discernment counseling world, it is a more active kind of stay the course. So typically, that could be something like, before I can make a decision, I need to spend some time in therapy working on some of my own issues, or I need you to go to therapy to deal with XYZ, or I need to wait another year until my social security kicks in, or
Mhm.
whatever it is. So it's a much more active stay the course. Path two is to agree to move towards separation and divorce. Path three is to make one final all out commitment to marriage counseling to see if the marriage potentially can be made better. And discernment counseling is done once there's a decision made. So, by by definition of the name of my discernment counseling website, stayorgocounseling.com,
Mhm.
it is designed for those people who are having trouble making a decision about what to do with the course of their marriage. Just to explain some of the differences, when people come in for discernment counseling, number one, most of the work is done with each person individually. With the leaning out partner, it is about exploring the paths and asking that person to look at what was your part in the marriage getting to the point where divorce is on the table.
Mhm.
And for the leaning in partner, again, it's exploring paths because they have agency too, but it is a lot more about helping them hold on to themselves and show up as their best selves as the discernment process is happening. And so when they come in, we're not doing marriage counseling. They're not given tools for communication. They're not given homework assignments. It is strictly focused on the decision-making process.
I'm so curious. How are you finding couples and individuals responding to discernment counseling, kind of compared to marriage counseling?
Well, keep in mind, again, by definition of the process, at least one person is coming in not having motivation to work on the relationship.
Hmm.
And so you're much more focusing on, this is going to sound like a really bad grammatical sentence, but we're looking at, do you want to save the marriage? And when couples come in for discernment counseling, they're on the brink. They are much more challenging couples by virtue of the fact they're coming in for discernment counseling, not marriage counseling.
So, when I think about discernment counseling versus marriage counseling, it sounds like, or it seems to me that with marriage counseling, you may come across a situation that really should be discernment counseling, because I have to imagine that sometimes couples come in and while they think marriage counseling is the right path, you do have someone who's one foot out the door and one person who's fully still in. So I'm curious whether that comes up with, hey, this is really a better fit for discernment counseling.
Absolutely. It comes up pretty frequently. And so what happens is, if I'm working with a couple and I realize after a period of time that one person does not seem to be motivated to change or does not seem to be really invested in the marriage counseling, or if I either find out or I suspect there's a secret they're holding that interferes with the marriage counseling process, then I would explain discernment counseling and ask them if they would want to make that switch.
So, for those who decide divorce is in fact the best answer for them, and especially focusing on older adults, how can they thrive post breakup?
Well, okay, this is where it gets a little tricky, because the best way you can thrive post breakup, the best ways are to set yourself up to thrive, period, long before divorce is on the table. And what I mean by that is to be engaged in your life. And this is for both men and women, but in different ways, because as we know, stereotypically, women, especially older women who may not have had careers, are they tend to they're the caretakers of the world, and they put all of their energy into taking care of their kids, taking care of their spouses, taking care of their homes, and haven't invested in themselves. And so when you get to a point where either you're divorcing later in life, or look, you could become widowed too, and maybe you have not established an identity for yourself. Whereas men, again, stereotypically, spend their lives very engaged and invested in their careers, and they don't establish the friendships that we do as women. They don't establish other support systems. They don't have hobbies and interests that they are doing on their own. And so, for both men and women, investing in yourself throughout your life and not waiting until you get to being divorced or widowed later on is a great thing you can do to help you thrive later on. Another thing, and again, women, I'm looking at you, often have no knowledge or understanding of the family financial situation. And by educating yourself, by being involved in money along the way in your relationship. Again, once you get to that point where you're looking at a divorce, you will have more information and education. And so let's just say for now you haven't done that.
Mhm.
One of the ways for you to thrive afterwards is to get information, to get education. When you start questioning or when you suspect that divorce might be on the table, a lot of, and again, women, I'm looking at you, a lot of women are afraid to go talk to a lawyer or talk to a financial planner. There is this fear that somehow if I go talk to somebody, it's going to magically make things happen. But I always say information is just information, but it is your best friend. Know what you're looking at. Another thing that I encourage people to do, get support. You know, your friends are wonderful supports, but they're biased. And well, it's really important to have your friends to talk with and lean on. If you have 10 friends, you're going to get 11 opinions. And support isn't giving opinions. You know, support is showing up and listening for the most part. And so work with a therapist. This is a big, big, big transition. And so having a good therapist is really important. There are divorce support groups out there, and some of them are geared toward older people. And you can do them virtually, you can do them in person. There are divorce support coaches. There, if you are spiritually inclined and you belong to a religious denomination that provides support through a divorce process, that's a place for you to look too. So the common denominator here is gather your supports and use your supports.
And that unbiased listening ear who can ask you questions to help you really work through what's the best choice for you. And if the best choice is divorce, really, what might I need to do to set myself up for success? A lot of that can come from within, but you need to be with that unbiased person to ask the questions and help challenge you along. That's what it sounds like you're saying.
Yes, absolutely. And one other thing I want to say about this, Cheryl, is when you're going through it, it can feel like the end of the world, but nobody dies of divorce.
Hmm. So before we wrap up, I would love for you to share with listeners where they can learn more about you, your counseling services, and your book, Gray Divorce, everything you need to know about later life breakups.
I would be happy to. The best place is at my author website, which is Linda Hirschman, LindaHershman.com. And on my author website, it gives you the links. The ebook is available on Amazon. The paperback needs to be ordered through BookBaby, but I have the links on that website, and I always have a promotion after doing a podcast, and I have the for the paperback. And so if you're looking for the paperback of Gray Divorce, everything you need to know about later life breakups, if you go onto my website, there will be a code to get. Right now, I think it's a $2 discount on the paperback book. And it also lists other podcasts that I've been on in case anybody wants to listen more, and any upcoming speaking engagements.
And I'll share all your websites in and the link to Amazon to get your book in the show notes or the description box, depending on where you're listening. And thank you so much for the discount code.
My pleasure.
So before we close, what do you hope to leave listeners with concerning gray divorce?
Okay, well, one of the things I just said, nobody dies of gray divorce. Another thing, getting back to the ACODs, is one of my number one law of Linda is you should always love your children more than you hate your ex.
Mm,
And so I think those two things pretty much summarize the most important takeaways.
it's very poignant. And thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your expertise in gray divorce, discernment counseling, and what we should consider before going through with a later life breakup. Thank you so much.
Thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you for listening to Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care Vigor, a unique program focused on aging with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience. You can find links and show notes from this episode on our website at friendslifecare.org/podcast. Thank you to Linda Hirschman for joining us today. You can find more about Linda, her counseling services, and her book, Gray Divorce, Everything You Need to Know About Later Life Breakups, by visiting lindahirschman.com, couplesandfamilywellnesscenter.com, stayorgocounseling.com, Facebook, LinkedIn, X, and Amazon. And thank you to Nick Dieterding for editing all the Honestly Aging episodes. If you like our show, please rate, review, subscribe, and join us next time. To learn more about aging with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience, subscribe to our blog at friendslifecare.org/blog.